Communication is a basic human need. That was the simple vision of Lars Magnus Ericsson when he started his telegraph repair shop back in 1876. This is the story of how that vision has been realized, transforming how we communicate today.
It was a new world, and you needed new skills of new technologies.
It was the first mobile systems that were deployed in the world, and we were in the beginning of something very, very big.
It is a story told by the people who were there, who overcame enormous challenges to deliver revolutionary new technology to the world.
It was very complicated technology. We needed fantastically good people to do it.
It was an amazing environment to work in.
Every day we build something.
This is for everybody. This is a freedom tool, like a car.
Technology that now has the ability to connect everyone and everything on the planet and transform how we live.
Giving people the opportunity to communicate in the poorest villages.
Everything that can benefit from being connected will be connected.
I found this wireless email strategy on the attic of my summer home that I wrote in '91. It tries to lay out how you use a wireless network to communicate with email. And of course, it's very rudimentary. How naive we were. But on the other hand, had we not done it, had we not, tried it, had we not pursued it, I mean, we might have been somewhere else today. That's how you got to look at it, I think. It dawns on me sometimes that I have been part of this. You bring back memories of the early days and that, God, how it's unbelievable the way we have come.
It's a little surprise I have for you, Mary. It's a telephone.
A telephone?
This is a time really when we're moving from the pre-modern to the modern. We see the railroads, we're starting to see the automobiles, we're seeing the light bulb, we're seeing this novel new way of communication, namely the telephone.
Isn't it just a toy?
In 1876, Bell is already manufacturing and selling telephones. And this is very quickly making big news in Stockholm, Sweden, a country which is already fascinated by modernity and engineering. We see, the birth of a totally different spirit of a time, when people feel suddenly that anything and everything is possible.
And into this comes Lars Magnus Ericsson, a gifted engineer. With his wife Hilda and his business partner Carl Johan Andersson, he sets up a small workshop. Initially, he repairs and manufactures telegraph equipment. But when customers come to Ericsson with telephones to repair, he sees a terrific opportunity. Here is an invention that fascinates him. He is soon manufacturing telephones of his own design. Lars Magnus is an engineer with a vision, and his new designs capture the public's imagination. In 1883, he forms a partnership that will be the making of his company. Henrik Torre Cedergren is an entrepreneur who, like Lars Magnus, sees the potential of the telephone. The partnership's aim is to provide telephone lines in every building and for all the tenants in them at a lower price. They construct a 1,200-line gantry on the roof of the Central Exchange, able to cope with over 3,000 subscribers.
So the result of this is that by 1885, Stockholm has more telephone subscribers than any other place in the world. The telephone is now becoming an essential tool to life, not just for businesses, but also for populations separated by large expanses of water and forests.
With global demand increasing at a rapid rate, Ericsson's operations expand around the world. In Russia, China, Mexico, cables stretch out across countries, and in cities, the skies become black with cables.
I think what is really standing out in the history is the globalization so early, the internationalizations, and the people, the salespeople in the early 1900s that went out on a boat and came home 2 years later and they sold one product. And you think about the perseverance and the way they really internationalized Ericsson in a very early stage where aircrafts or communication didn't exist over borders.
In 1903, by the time Ericsson retires, his company is one of the foremost providers of world-class telephones and telephone exchanges in the world, present in over 100 countries. This global scale would prove to be a defining asset in realizing the vision of connecting people right through to the present day.
Kerwin Baker, please.
The 1950s and 60s on into the early 1970s, we have a period of great optimism, tremendous economic growth, right? Opening up of new markets, connections between new markets. This is the backdrop for new increasing pressures on the systems of communication.
Within growing city networks, one conversation over one copper cable had reached capacity. With the introduction of digital technology, speech was now digitized into zeros and ones, which meant a number of conversations could be sent over one cable. Now the attention was turned on the old analog telephone exchanges, which were beginning to show their limitations through speech and connection delays. They were becoming outmoded and near to breaking point.
I can't take any calls now.
Ericsson was under pressure to bring the zeros and ones into the exchanges.
The old mechanical switches were running out of capacity, so development of the digital switch was the ultimate goal. The Swedish operator Televerket and Ericsson realized that the cost was too heavy, and they combined their resources, they combined their development engineers with this ultimate goal to develop the digital switch.
The great idea from going from analog switches to digital switches, how much more capacity you can get, how much more people that can actually be using telecommunications.
Instead of having an entire building, you could decrease both the switch element and the computers into small racks.
It was capable of handling scale, which was of course an enormous benefit later, but also had for that time a very high computing power, and also modular software base that could be adapted from the fixed to the mobile.
That's the great success of AXE that really conquered the world after 1976.
The telephone was now established as a mechanism for connecting people across many large distances. However, the new challenge becomes, can the telephone itself become mobile?
It was obvious to me, if there was a way that you didn't have any longer to be tied to the wall while you were speaking on the phone, that technology would develop and be immensely important. I thought this was a fabulous opportunity, new technology, new frontiers, and I just couldn't resist it.
In the late 60s, a group of countries with their respective engineers got together to create a new telephone system that would be a significant step towards changing mobile telecommunications. In 1969, the Nordic Mobile Telephone Group, NMT, was established to create the first fully automatic transnational cellular phone system that would link up with the Nordic countries of Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden.
The Nordic countries had really already established a common zone for free trade, for crossing borders without having to use a passport. So there was an ideal kind of experimental ground, right, for developing this new technology with the least amount of resistance and the maximum amount of interest and openness.
Ericsson was part of the work, and so was one of Ericsson's small subsidiaries called SRA. They were the radio arm of Ericsson.
We worked with a lot of things within radio, taxi radio, paging, land mobile radio for police.
They were a pretty small, pretty insignificant part of Ericsson, probably less than 5% of revenue.
And this company was led by Åke Lundqvist. He was the CEO of this company, and he had great visions, and his vision was really to be the #1 company in the world when it comes to mobile communication.
That little company became extremely important for the success we have today.
It had the vision to grab the new thing that was happening in telecom, the merger of telephony and radio.
Then suddenly something happened. Ericsson had, together with Philips, won the world's largest contract for landline telephony in Saudi Arabia. A little bit of that contract were a mobile telephone system. So Ericsson came to SRA, say, what can we do? And Åke Lundqvist said, we have the phones, you have the switch, we need a base station. And he staggered some one-channel radio links and coupled them, and there's more to it than that. But that became a base station anyhow. And we went to Saudi and said, okay, we can supply you with a full modern cellular mobile telephone system. We got the order. The order was written on a A5 piece of paper, handwritten. I hereby order a mobile telephone system to cover Riyadh, Jeddah and Medina, plus 8,000 mobile telephones. That was really the world's first contract for a mobile telephone system. We knew we had a lot of things to do. I mean, the phones we had shown the Saudis, they were wooden models. We didn't have a base station ready. We did not have the interface to the switch. We didn't have cell planning in place. There were a lot of work to be done. We had people that were dedicated. They would not go home in the evening. Some of them would even sleep in the offices. There were many problems. The heat was tremendous to work in. We had to erect radio towers. We had to install the mobiles in cars. And the first time we tried to drill through the wing of a car to install an antenna, the drill broke because it was an armored car. We had tested the equipment at home, especially the keyboards, at 100 degrees. When they came into the cars in Saudi Arabia, they melted. So there were problems, but we delivered 1 month ahead of schedule.
This all describes a very entrepreneurial spirit.
It was an amazing environment to work in.
It was a new world, and you needed new skills of new technologies.
We had an enthusiastic team of people, fearless people, passionate people that were willing to go anywhere to develop a new business.
Suddenly we were supplying a system from A to Z. We were coming in with a switch, with the interface to the base stations, the radio towers, the cell planning. It was a complete package.
Are you sure we didn't forget something? We did mention, didn't we, that all our components come from LM Ericsson?
Now, the defining moment occurred in Holland when the Dutch telecom operator had requested to get supply for an NMT network, and they asked Ericsson to supply the switch and Motorola to supply the base station. Motorola was the big lion. They were the world's largest supplier of radio communication equipment. SRA was basically nothing in comparison to them.
We had to convince them that Ericsson was also a good radio supplier. We wanted to prove to the PDT and to the world that we in fact could do it. And that was a very frustrating time.
Then Åke Lundqvist stepped in and participated in the negotiation and demanded that Ericsson should supply the entire network and without Motorola. And if they didn't accept it, no AXE switch.
He was there negotiating and eventually just threw his fist on the table and said, "You got to listen to me." Obviously that had some impact.
That decision from Ericsson to back Åke Lundqvist and say no switches for radio unless you buy the whole thing from us. That was the strategic decision that was going to turn the whole future for Ericsson. Dutch Telecom, they bent it and they bought the system.
That was the starting point for Ericsson to become a complete cellular network provider. And without that, Ericsson would have been nothing today.
It was the first mobile systems that were deployed in the world, and we were in the beginning of something very, very big. Ericsson was the leading switching supplier. We were present in 135 countries around the world. You could go from country to country, which we did. If you wanted to go to Thailand because you wanted to sell them a mobile system, there was an Ericsson office there.
we got systems contract all over the world, in Far East, in UK, and Åke Lundqvist decided also that we should enter the US.
He saw there was an opportunity there, and he wanted to definitely pursue it. He thought he could do it. He got himself into the game. He wanted to win the game.
I think Åke Lundqvist's leadership style had a very important role in how this company moved.
He changed the culture in that company over the coming years into a dynamic, young organization.
We were allowed to do almost anything. We were allowed to have a vision. And that kind of spirit does not exist in every company. When I took over the mobile laboratory in Lund in 1985, our vision was clearly to make small mobile phones for everybody. We wanted to make pocket phones. I mean, a phone was a box like this in the trunk. They were car phones. And so one of my first jobs was take the circuit diagram, huge circuit diagrams, and start deleting components and making rings, saying we have to integrate this, we have to shrink this, and we have to take away all of that. People didn't have the vision of what it could do. Newspapers and magazines, they were discussing sort of whether 10% or 5% or 3% of the population really needed this funny device, a telephone that you can move around. They didn't see what could happen. The good thing for us, we saw it. We knew where we were heading. And the first thing we decided was that this is for everybody. This is a freedom tool, like a car. It was the leading star of what we were doing. We were doing a product for ourselves, for our kids, for our wives, for our mothers. You're building freedom for everybody. There was nothing more wonderful for an engineering group to do mobile phones.
Mobile telephony evolved during the 80s and became more popular. It was still, of course, highly fragmented. If you were traveling to UK or France or Germany, roaming just didn't work. You didn't have the device that worked there. And in the US, even if it was the same standard across the continent, still roaming was not there at all in a universal way. GSM, I think, came out of the positives we saw in the early days of NMT.
GSM was the world's first digital mobile system, and it was intended for everyone in Europe. The European community was very much backing this.
GSM here then becomes a crucial component, right, for European integration and also to symbolize itself cooperation between the European countries at a very important moment in the growth of the European community itself.
I mean, it was a lot of hard work, among others by the operators in Europe and by a lot of vendors in Europe as well, to set up the standard of GSM. And it took a lot of years just to define the standard. How would the different machines in the network talk to each other?
It was really super daring to do a radio system of that complexity, fully digital. There was nothing more high-tech in the world, not even in the military side. It was an absolute super challenge.
It was very complicated technology. We needed fantastically good people to do it. Radio propagation is very complicated. There's a lot of reflections and things going on. And to cope with that requires things that no one had really solved.
We did enormous amount of measurements of transmission properties all over the world within cities and so-called urban canyons with boundaries between all the skyscrapers of big cities. And it was clear from the beginning that it needed advanced digital signal processing, brought down on super small microchips consuming no power at all, even though the computations were incredibly complicated.
Just to give you one example of how technology challenging it was with GSM, especially back in 1986, was that when we sent these bits out from the base station to the mobile, some of the bits would bounce off a mountain and come that way to the mobile, and some would go straight to the mobile. This takes time. And you don't think it's a long time, but the bits become old. And in fact, you cannot just combine them again. You have to resolve the echo from the mountain. And that we do by building a model of the mountains inside the phone, several times per second.
July 1st, 1991, the first GSM call was set up. And I know so many years afterwards exactly what I was doing that day. And it was so good.
Of course, the critical thing was to get handsets to customers. And in Cannes, one of the first GSM conferences, George Schmidt of Mannesmann said, GSM stands for God Send Mobiles. And I think that says a lot about it. And it was a challenge for the coming year or so.
There was no technology to do small mobile phones. It all had to be invented. It was a major gamble, betting the whole system on it. So at the day when we were sort of getting our first microchips back and hoping that, wow, pray it works, because we will be totally ruined if it doesn't work. We did it, but we almost thought it would never work. It was that complex.
There were companies that didn't believe it would be possible to do it, and they basically missed the whole GSM race because of it.
It was a great system. It had all the good things about roaming. The phones were becoming smaller and smaller. They were coming down in price after a number of years because it was digital. That's the difference between digital and analog. Once you get the digital right, you can get the cost down.
We very quickly made this plan of this is a phone, next generation phone is smaller, next generation phone is even smaller, next generation is... So we knew where we were heading. We based our whole strategy on something called Moore's Law. Moore's Law is something that means that microchips are constantly becoming smaller. And all the technologies that were not following Moore's Law, we had to force them to follow Moore's Law. So then there are lots of components that are not microchips, like batteries and displays and keyboards and stuff. And some of them are the size of our fingers, so they cannot really shrink as much. But everything that can shrink was forced to shrink.
It spread all over the world.
You could see it in poor countries, in rich countries. It was really important for us.
Because it became so adopted worldwide rather quickly, it also became inexpensive and accessible to people who did not have a lot of money. And it tells you a lot about the role of GSM, right, in democratizing the world from the point of view of communication, making it accessible in countries that had, in fact, no functioning landline system whatsoever.
GSM is a digital system for voice, which means that voice is basically transferred as data. So towards the end of the 90s, we started evolving GSM to also allow data transfer over the same mobile system.
The data services was offered on top from the start, pretty much, and especially SMS. Very few people used it in the start. But fairly soon, the low charge for SMS gave a huge amount of the population an easy and cheap way to communicate.
Tonight on the streets of Manila, there's widespread relief that weeks of political turmoil have ended without serious violence.
In the Philippines, for example, it was the basis for what became known as people power in the overthrow of the regime of Estrada. It was a form of networking that was much more powerful than just merely speaking over the telephone to one person. You could send messages to hundreds of people in this way. So it became an enormous force, right, for democratic exchange.
And I mean, the rest is history. SMS today is the most widely used data communication around.
Then there was this thing called internet that came around in those days, in the early 90s.
What is internet anyway? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
And then we started to realize that's going to be a big thing.
The idea was to combine internet and mobile, making internet mobile. But then we realized that working with the GSM, the data speeds were not really enough.
It could only deliver like 30, 40, 50 kilobits per second. That's why we really started to work on 3G. And then we had achieved like 10 times faster than GSM. And still, it didn't really fly. So then we had to do something more. We had to innovate new technology. And we then invented something called HSPA, which gave another factor of 10. So we had then achieved 100 times faster than GSM. And we were up to 3-4 megabits per second. At that point, 3G really happened. And of course, then it started with dongles for laptops. Then came the smartphone. So with the smartphone, iPhones and Androids, it just exploded.
When you look at how mobile phones and mobile devices now are used, especially for TV and video, you need all the capacity you can get.
In every step of the data rate evolution, we have been the first ones to show new technology to the market. We were first to show LTE, and we were also first to show LTE advanced 1 gigabit per second.
The LTE is the next step in the evolution in delivering higher speeds at a competitive cost.
We have built these networks all around the world. We have more than 6 billion mobile subscriptions in the world. We have 1 billion people having mobile broadband. It will not stop there.
People are expecting to be connected everywhere, and that is on a global scale now. So we can see examples from rural Africa. People are expecting connectivity, and also with the connectivity they become a part of the global village, more or less.
Everything that can benefit from being connected will be connected, and a thing that is not connected will be seen as a very stupid thing.
There's going to be some 50 billion connected devices on the networks that we're deploying. And compared to what we thought from the beginning, where this was only one service, that was the voice. You call each other. And we even thought, why do we need to walk around when we have a phone?
We contribute today with our technology, giving people the opportunity to communicate in the poorest villages in Africa. I mean, that's exciting stuff.
What those clever guys have done, that's amazing.
You have to be very innovative to become 136 years old. You have to keep on re-innovating and challenge your own best profitable products before a competitor does it to you.
Only our own imagination can put the limit to what really will happen.
Well, you've got to try things out.
How far can you go? I think that's where imagination brings you.
It has been a fantastic voyage. On the north shore of Borneo, I saw one of those big Ericsson mobile phones standing on a sack of rice. That was the local telephone booth. You could phone from there to the rest of the world. That was one of the moments where I was proud of being an Ericsson man.